We are set, Mr. Jacobs.
Okay. So I'm going to call the South Orangetown Central School District, March 23rd, 2021 Board of Education meeting to order at 7:16 p.m. Doing a roll call, I am present. Mr. LaMadrid is present. Mr. Henry is present. Ms. Lee is present, and Dr. Stepanian is present. Can we rise and do the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Does any board member have any board announcements? So I would just say I congratulate those athletic teams that had successful seasons. I also congratulate the other athletic teams that were able to enjoy the opportunity to compete, and hope that they found it all beneficial and enjoyable. Are there any committee reports? No committee reports since our last meeting. So we have policy 0101, the gender neutral bathrooms, the second reading. We had it, the first reading at the last meeting, and I don't believe there were any comments at that point. So can I have a motion to waive the third reading and adopt the policy 0101, gender neutral single occupancy bathrooms?
Motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. With regard to the consent agenda, before I have a motion to approve the consent agenda, I'd like to pull items 6, 8, and 9. So I'd like to have a motion to approve consent agenda items number 7 and number 10.
Motion.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Is there any new business? Seeing none, I'll just wish everybody an enjoyable spring break. And if you have a holiday during the spring break, may you have an opportunity to enjoy the holiday. And just if we can all keep in mind the socially distance guidelines, so that we can come back to a schools program that hopefully brings more of our students back into the classroom. May I have a motion to adjourn to a budget workshop at 7:20 p.m.
Motion.
Second.
Thank you, Christine. Any discussions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
We are in a workshop.
Mr. Jacobs, Mrs. Coster is getting the presentation set up. I just want to echo a couple of points that I made while we were prior to the meeting relating to where we are at in the budget development for the 2021-2022 school year. There's been a bit of variability as it relates to revenue streams. As many of you are aware, we're still waiting on finalization of the budget, as well as the realization of any federal aid streams that might impact on our ability to sustain our operations for next year. So we do have, and we're also cognizant of our long-range financial strategy, which includes the sequential closing of out-year budget deficits. So there's obviously some cost considerations that are that consider that the budget, the gap, the reduction of expenses as they relate to the spending plan, a spending plan that's full of variability, as well as a revenue picture that has yet to be developed. To staffing, as they relate to our demographic changes, changes in enrollment, as well as looking for increased efficiencies. So these are so I would rather give you a more accurate picture, one that we've checked and rechecked, and tonight you'll get some of that story. But I think we should start at the beginning, and with that I will introduce Mrs. Koster. She's going to take us through a PowerPoint slide presentation, and it's about 17 slides, which is not a short presentation. So I would ask that we possibly save our questions till the end. So if you would kindly write down your questions, and that will be the certainly the basis for our discussion once we get through. But Mrs. Koster, I would also invite you to stop as you see fit to ask questions of the Board of Education at the appropriate time.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Pritchard. As you can see, my apologies. I'm just trying to refresh my screen. There we go. I think we're having a little bit of a connection issue here, but I think we're coming up here. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. I think we're almost there. It's resetting. This one off. All right, let's see. Okay. Okay, let's see if this works. Okay, here we go. Okay, thank you. Sorry for that delay with the connection. So as Bob mentioned, just tonight is really our first budget workshop in preparing for the 21-22 school year. So I'll walk through some of the highlights and some considerations that we've made so far, and some of the work that we'll continue to do. And at the end, if you have any questions, but we'd also like to seek some board direction and parameters so that we can continue to meet as a cabinet and as an administrative team. To prepare a further draft for review at our next meeting, which would be April 8th. So with that said, hopefully we keep connection. Let's see. Okay, let's see if it goes. Okay. Hey, George, I think we're completely stuck here. Let's see.
All right, so while we're dealing with the gremlins, on April 8th, we'll have, in anticipation of April 8th's workshop, we'll have well in advance of April 8th, we'll have a draft, first draft of the budget for your review.
All right, let me try this once again. Okay. There we go. Hopefully we're set. Okay. Okay. So what are objectives, living through the pandemic for over a year now, but really maintaining a focus on our strategic plan and our objectives and goals post-pandemic has remained closely aligned to our budget discussions and analysis in preparing the 21-22 preliminary budget document. And again, that really maintains a focus, as you can see by the slide, how our resource allocation continues to be aligned to our district strategic goals. Protecting our instructional core for all students, meeting the evolving needs of all of our students, utilizing our master plan to enhance student experience, and that would be through the health and safety of our continued upkeep of our buildings and grounds. And we know we've done a lot of work through our facilities committee and as a board to that end on our master planning. And then continuing to look at multiple funding sources to always look to offset the tax burden through uses of our federal grant programs as well as our general fund. And then continue to look for efficiencies in structures, our systems, our processes. So you'll see a little bit of that this evening as well. So far, the actions taken, we've met several times as a cabinet and as a full administrative team as we've kept apprised of the changing state affairs with our New York State governor and the predicament he's in right now, but also that we are due for the state budget to be, if it's an on-time budget, it will be passed by April 1st next week. And given that we've all seen the media, we know that there has been at least 2 more federal stimulus packages passed that we're waiting for further information on that will most likely and hopefully come out as part of the state budget news next week. So we'll go into that a little bit further this evening. But the actions taken so far, we really try to synchronize all of our efforts to get an understanding of how we're using our resources and really looking through the lens of where can we find greater efficiencies, but are we using all of our resources effectively as well? Always maintaining a long-term financial perspective while planning for the short term. That's really key to keep in mind what our long range, our outer years look like when preparing a single year budget and the impact that that budget may have on our future years. And then looking at, which is a large part of the conversation, is mapping our staff utilization to the needs of our program, based on real-time data. So we did, as Dr. Pritchard mentioned, we did a lot of work even again today, this afternoon, reviewing our enrollment projections, reviewing feedback from principals on their courses and their schedules, and really trying to use the data that we have present to gather a good snapshot of what our staffing looks like for next year, at least at this point in time, and that is fluid as well. So first, this may look fairly familiar. I know we've done a couple of updates and this was similar to some of the audit and finance 2 meetings that we've had. Right now with the state aid and projecting it forward, you'll see in the middle of the slide, the projected 2021-22 aid really breaks down our state aid projection picture, that without including our universal pre-K grants, we are budgeting an estimated $12.605 million. Our foundation aid, as you'll see from this top, unless something changes with the state budget next week, continues to be frozen. And with our public cost excess set aside, it's a net foundation remaining still at $6.983 million. And then when we take into consideration our other high tax cost aids and our excess aids, what's listed pretty much all the way down until the gap elimination adjustment column are the categories that our governor originally collapsed into a services-based aid, which was our expense-based aids that in his first proposal he made to collapse down those aids. It doesn't look like by both the House and the Senate that will now go through. There's been a lot of advocacy to not let that happen. And there was also an associated $393 million reduction in the state budget if that should have happened. So that's a little bit of good news. What we do to come up with this state aid analysis is really break down the governor's proposal and truly make it an apples to apples comparison and then use our historical numbers as well as the aid that we projected for 2021 a year ago at this time to what we're actually receiving in aid, and making those comparisons. One of the things that we know that the governor did was included STAR in the state aid proposal, which has never been included as part of that. So you really have to break down the categories that he rolls up into this proposal. So it can be somewhat misleading when his first executive proposal comes out and our public sees that. But overall, with the estimated aid, it remains, as you'll see, relatively flat. Last year we budgeted just about a little over 12 million, and we're actually receiving this year at about 12.5. So we're budgeting next year for 12.6. However, there is a large item as part of our state aid, which is the monies that the governor took from the second round of stimulus monies, where you see that $2.8 million. These are the conversations that you see still happening where the governor used federal dollars for school districts to supplant the state's commitment to use state dollars to fund public education for the following fiscal year. So the 2.8 reduction that he took from state dollars out of the state budget was offset by the second round of stimulus monies from the federal government that the governor included in his budget. And we had seen that, I think, back in December, January-ish time. So right now in this picture with state aid, and one of the things that we're looking at for next week is that if the governor comes out with his next proposal, is how, given all the press on our president and our assembly and our senates approving additional stimulus monies to work down through the states to public schools, to higher education, to private schools, one, to offset some of the pandemic costs, but also how do we plan for reopening school for our students and address some of the academic and social, emotional, and mental health needs of our students. This still remains a big question as to whether or not the state budget will indeed pull out the federal dollars that the governor was projecting to get from the federal government and put that into the state budget to whatever the legislature agrees to as the total amount of state aid for schools next week. If that should happen, we haven't seen what would happen to this federal allocation. Say ours remains 2.8. We don't have any of that information yet. We're hoping for that for next week. So I think this is really a big conversation in terms of there's a lot of press with federal dollars out there right now, and trying to offset some of the burden for all of our schools to return students. So to recap, the first monies we saw were the CARES Act, and that was the $299,000 original pandemic adjustment that we received, and that was offset by the CARES Act. We still had to go through a grant application. We still jumped through a lot of hoops. And I was happy to report at the last meeting that we just started to receive our first 20% from that CARES money. So it's taken this long for us to actually see the start of some receipt of that CARES Act money. That again was another example of the state offsetting a reduction in state aid by supplanting it with federal dollars, and federal dollars in which we had to apply for, similar to a grant application process, receive approval, and then start to see the cash flow coming in. So the 2.8 was the second round. State government supplanting state dollars with federal dollars to meet their commitment on state aid. That's a big number. So hopefully we have some more information next week. But at least for now, for our revenue picture, our state aid at the 12.6 million is relatively flat year to year. So we're able to at least count on this number for now. We're not anticipating, conservatively speaking, a windfall of monies coming our way.
Mrs. Coster?
Yeah.
We're supposed to be live streaming right now, but apparently we're not.
Recording, where we close to workshop, Lonnie, adjourned to workshop.
I see. Okay. All right. That's acceptable. My apologies. Sorry.
Okay. And one of the other things that if we're asked, the UPK grant is listed on the bottom. That's really a grant. Our governor likes to stick that in a state aid proposal. So we received 489,000 total for our UPK program, which equates to just over a $13 million aid package. But again, that UPK is a grant program and is really not considered a part of our state aid stream. So that was broken out, and we break this out like this every year. So when we look at our fund balance, and this is similar to when I presented it last, we are looking at a fund balance at June 30th, where we maintain our 4% and we fund our reserves by the use of the excess of $5.7 million. And why I wanted to bring this sheet up again is that with the tax certiorari liability and the increases that we've seen over the last couple of years, in addition to our efforts to maintain and build upon our capital reserve to have those monies available for future project work, this fund balance really represents our reserves being fully funded up to cover the liability of our tax certiorari liability at 7.265 million. Actually, I think it's a little bit over. The unemployment, our employee benefits, and our employee retirement contributions, are already up to their legal limit based on our payroll. So that there's no allocation going into those as June 30 at present. And then we have just about 4.9 million projected to go into our capital reserve, bringing that reserve to just over 18 million. And then we always plan to encumber for end of the year encumbrances that carried over into the next year. And then our 4% of next year's budget is 3.928 million. So at June 30th, that would give us a total fund balance of 33.913 million. So the importance of this slide is that we're continuing our reserve strategy that's been in place by you as the Board of Education for a long time to make sure that we properly maintain our reserve balances to cover any potential liabilities that we may encounter, but also a decision by the board could be made to offset any type of drastic changes in our revenue flow that could have a substantial impact on our revenue stream and or our taxpayers. So that is in place within our long range plan. And this data was used in consideration of how we develop our next year's budget. So with those items said, this is a sheet that the board's familiar with. And it has been updated to reflect the preliminary or draft 2021-22 budget at this point in time, which is shaded in blue. And you'll see right now that our preliminary budget is at a 98.208 budget, or a 1.41 budget to budget increase over fiscal year 2020-2021. And when I last did an update, this is a year, if anything, based on the state budget and the structure of our revenue stream. It's really a revenue capped budget this year, more than any other year that we've seen. Based on the top on our estimated revenue, you'll see that our property tax cap sits at 83.676 million, or 0.10% maximum allowable levy. And then with our other aid categories remaining relatively flat, including our 12.6 million for state aid, we arrive at a revenue picture of 98.208 million. And then as a school district, we know that we must present a balanced budget to our voters. Revenues must equal expenditures. So I think this year, going through budget development and us working as a team, it's one of the years that's more notably really a revenue capped budget. From there, we've done a lot of work really examining our salaries and benefits, which are the largest category of expense in our budget for us, as well as conversations and meetings with principals, cabinet, and the admin team to really go down and carefully review our projections and our expenditures budgeted for next year, based on looking at prior history, how this year appears to arrive at June 30th, with, again, understanding that this year was a very different year. A lot of, the norm wasn't the norm this year. So we're very cognizant of that when looking at our expenses, our projected expenses for year end this year. So again, we're at a 1.41 budget to budget increase over last year. And then you'll see at the bottom of the screen, it once again, it shows our total fund balance coming in at just about 33.913 million. If you'll recall, and I'd be more than happy to share this as well, either in an email or a board report this Friday, but I think it's worth mentioning. The last time I provided an update, we had about $1.2 million to cut from the budget at that time based on our early projections to arrive at a $98.2 million budget. And again, as we refined expenditures, we had some areas that went up, we had some that went down. So we have progressively worked towards sharpening our pencils and really refining and coming back to the table time and time again, just to double check to say, is this correct? Have we verified payroll as many times as we've needed to understand what our salary structure is and what our contractual expenses are? But I'm going to steal a page from Dan's book, and I'm going to go to the outer years for a moment, because it's really important that we keep that in mind. When we had a budget where we still had to cut $1.2 million from, when you look at 2022, 23, and the next 2 years, when you look in the peach, if you'll recall, we were millions of dollars in the red the outer 3 years. And what you will hear tonight, as part of this budget proposal, there are some instructional and non-instructional reductions in FTEs in staff. We're trying to take advantage of attritions that we know at this point, and we also looked at positions that would not need to be replaced with staff. But by getting the budget to a 1.41. It enables it so that right now, based on the projections, we're in the black the 3 outer years. So that reduction of that $1.2 million from where we were initially, and I know Dan and Lonnie, this is something we had in our last Audit and Finance Committee. It really put us back in the black, assuming that all the other indicators in each of the next following 3 years remains constant. But it did update a more favorable picture in the 3 outer years beyond next year. And then what it does is the way that we do long range on the bottom is for fund balance for the 3 outer years, we continue to project forward the same numbers, just so we can do a side-by-side comparison. And we still remain in the black in 22, 23, 23, 24, and 24, 25. And you'll just note at the bottom right now, the projection has us about $60,544 in the red for the 21-22 school year, based on the numbers presented at the top and for fund balance. But we know that adjustments will be made, and fund balance will also be updated based on the 21-22 operating cycle. So we went from a 1.2 deficit projection in long range. Through the work, we've been able to eliminate that 1.2 and get the budget to budget spending where we need it to be at a 1.41 increase. And so right now this is a balanced picture, but we're not done. I think the state budget, as Bob mentioned, this has been fluid. We all know that we've really taken a flexible approach, I think more so this year than last year, because there's some unknown factors in terms of the state budget, but also keeping in mind we can make our best predictions on what post-pandemic is going to look like, but being cognizant and sensitive to the fact that we don't truly know the full impact to our students and our families and our staff yet. So we are very mindful in keeping that in the forefront of our planning and our discussions. So the single year budget, when we come to the 21-22 budget, Again, I won't read through all of this, but these are our goals that we hold near and dear as we plan the budget. That keeps the cabinet members, all of us here, on task with making sure that when we look at our areas of responsibility and also have conversations with building and department leaders, that we continue to check our budgetary goals against our strategic goals. And you'll see we're very still focused, even post-pandemic, on our academic program. We're focused on the health and safety of our learning environment, the mental health of our students and staff, having a positive school culture for all of our students. And that's going to be ever more important next year as we presumably go back to normal school operation come September. And then really, I think, if anything, through Dr. Karen Tessick's work with the food pantry, that's just one example of the expansion with our community partners in better assisting our families, especially now during this last year of the pandemic. So just continuing to look for approaches to expand that school to home partnership, but also expanding through our community organizations and how we can continue to serve our community as well. And again, our food pantry is a shining example of that this past year. And then always looking for a systematic approach to continuous improvement and alignment. And again, it's about using all of our resources, our human, our financial, our capital, in the most effective and efficient way to achieve our goals. And then maintain a fiscally sound plan that is sensitive to our community's needs. And again, we're very cognizant of the economic landscape right now. We see that on a property tax cap, we saw 0.1%. We know that CPI came in at 1.23%. We know that there's a lot of families looking for stimulus dollars. So being very cognizant this year for next year on the impact to our families financially, as well as emotionally. So considerations, when working as a cabinet, some of the work that we do, we always look at what our enrollment projections are and line that up with conversations with our principals in terms of the schedules, what they need to make their schedules run, what course offerings, what electives get run. And I'll let Brian and Karen and others kind of join in at the end of this just to expand upon those considerations. We do an evaluation of our budgeted expenses to really ascertain our instructional and our operational needs. And this budget is really focused on what is considered a need for next year versus a wish. So we made a real concerted effort to really focus our dollars towards our absolute needs and our contractual obligations and the mandates for this next budget year. I've mentioned the federal stimulus monies. We're really looking to see what that looks like next week. The positive with the amount of stimulus monies being approved, even in this third round. And I don't know if the board saw it, I think LOHUD had it in an article one day, and then there was clarification. This third round of stimulus money, it's projected that we would receive $1.1 million. And through advocacy efforts, we are hearing from our associations that these monies most likely will be placed in the federal program. It will go application through the state. We'll go through the U.S. Department of Ed first. These monies then will be allocated to the state, and then it'll be moved to the federal program. So we will receive an allocation of $1.1 million. We'll have to apply for it under allowable uses. But one of the things that really touches upon Brian's and Karen's area is these monies are to be used at least the first 20% for learning loss as a result of this pandemic. And then the other allowable uses are, we could look at summer academic programming. We could look at mental health services for our students and our staff. It also allows for technology and other instructional resources to assist in the 2021-22 school year. So that's the third round of stimulus monies that we're hoping to hear more information next week on. And Brian, I don't know if you want to add anything to that at this point, or Karen.
Well, just what you said, that Karen and I are already planning a pretty robust summer program. K-12. And we're also talking to our school leaders about weaving that in throughout the course of next year to make sure that any learning loss that occurred. And we gave examples of kids who are moving on from pre-algebra to algebra or pre-calculus to calculus, and many examples where we know we want to provide some before and after school programming as well as throughout the summer to make sure kids have an opportunity to catch up. And we're hoping that some of this money will help offset those costs.
And what we really saw even today, we still have basically 1,000 code budget coding system. And we went through that today too, because as a 1.41% budget, part of this, and I know as a board, you have been interested in this each year through budget development, where what were the considerations made and what are some of the things that may not have made it into this budget? As Brian mentioned, it's those extras coming off a pandemic and really wanting to run a robust summer academic programming and addressing increased needs. That federal program will really help because the dollars needed cannot be fully budgeted for in this 1.4% budget without cutting something to make that happen. So it's ever more important that we do receive that 1.1 allocation. And Karen, I just want to stop. I know that you're connecting and you just came out of teaching your class. Did you want to say anything, Karen?
Just reading what Brian said, really, we've always focused on, and we were able to do it last summer with the support of the district, that remediation for the students during the summer, so that not only did we addressed some of the loss that we received because of the pandemic, but we didn't allow the slide back, especially in areas of reading and some related services. And that was really imperative to make sure that our students picked off. And that this summer, one of the questions that we're starting to investigate is, what do we put in place for social emotional to bridge students back into the building to feel safer? And that will really be contingent upon how open we are before we leave in June. So I just wanted to add that piece because that's something that we definitely will look at.
Karen, I heard you and I wanted to make sure I didn't pass by.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And so again, ever more important that we're really situationally aware of our environment right now and really being flexible again during this fiscal year's budget planning in response to the pandemic, but also in response to the post-pandemic needs that we're going to have this summer and for next year. And then you'll hear a little bit tonight about efficiencies garnered by repurposing and sharing of resources. And to that end, we are talking about staffing and considerations of legacy costs that have been generated from pandemic purchasing. And this is George's world. I would say primarily, if I'm correct, George, there was needs for technology and software programs, I think, unlike what we've seen in previous years. And so, reviewing the continuing costs that are born out of the purchases that were a necessity to make this year. And George, I just want to open it to you if you wanted to mention anything about the technology end in terms of what you're seeing.
Yeah, and I think you really explained it well. Listen, during the pandemic, we clearly realized that we needed to provide resources to our students and our staff to be able to manage this hybrid learning environment. The problem is, and this is something that we face typically in the world of technology, people think about the CapEx, the capital expense first, but they don't think about the operating, right? So you buy the widget, but how do you support it after the fact? So we did actually purchase quite a number of instructional resources that do have ongoing costs that we have to actually take into consideration as we're looking to tighten up this budget as well.
Thank you, George. And I think this is something that we've either talked about in audit and finance or one of our committee meetings is as we're making decisions or recommendations to the board for projects or purchases of equipment or other technology that we really factor in the results that we expect, but also the legacy costs associated with maintaining that newly acquired asset. So with that said, this is our 5-year budget summary, and you'll see from adopted budget 27-18, each fiscal year leading up to the preliminary 2021-22 budget. And you'll see last year we were at a 2.2 in budget to budget increase at a $96.83 million budget. You can see how our aid and our other revenues compare year to year. And then our tax levy. So our tax levy, from actually 2017-18, which was also a drop at 1.75, but then into the mid 3% to 2.71 for 2021, and then 0.10 for the 2021-22 school year based on the tax cap formula. And that's really derived from the 1.23% CPI. And that is really not a 2% cap, as was originally portrayed in 2013 and caught on through Governor Cuomo's actions, to our capital exclusion. Now that our projects are wrapping up, less of a capital exclusion to add back to the limit. So that those are the two primary reasons for a 0.10% tax cap. But again, we're at a maximum allowable levy of 83.67 million. It is at the cap, requiring a simple majority vote. Okay, there we go. I'm hitting it too fast. My computer is not fast enough for me this evening. All right, so this is just another pie chart to show our revenue. It really looks consistent from year to year. We know that our two major revenue flows are through our property taxes, which is about 85% of our revenue stream. And then our state aid, which is about 12.84% or 12.6 million. That's why it's so important when we think about the lower tax cap, but then also looking at the state aid impacts, and then how the federal stimulus dollars will come into play, really have some kind of impact on our two major revenue streams to support our budget. And then we have use of money and property, which is our leases, primarily with BOCES, at 1.7 million or 1.75% of our revenue stream. Charge for services, the 60,889 is our continuing education program at present. And then other miscellaneous revenues at about 149,000 or 0.15% of our budget. So this looks comparable from year to year in terms of our revenue stream. And then on our expense side, right now, based on a preliminary budget of $98.2 million, the largest support goes to our instructional expenses at about 55.7 million, or just under 57% of our total expense. General support comes in at just about 10.3% or $10.1 million of our budget. And then we have our benefits, which is projected to be about $23.4 million in this budget, or just under 24% of our budget. And so that's why it's been so important that we review our salaries and our staffing needs for next year, because that really ends up being over 75% of our total expense that we're budgeting for. And then our transportation is seeing about a 4.79% allocation next year at about just $4.7 million. And we really had to look closely this year and work with Karen's office in terms of knowing where our out of district placements are projected to be, just so that we could map out transportation needs accordingly. And also with our private placements, we really saw an uptick this year with the amount of requests for transportation for private placements. And once again, our state education department, as well as through the governor's executive orders, he's extended even this year's deadlines to submit for transportation to our private placements for this year. It's normally April 1st. It has continued to be, it should have ended last April. It's continued all the way through this year. So we're keeping an eye on that, if there'll be an extension on the deadline for parents for next year. And then debt service is just a little over $2 million. And then our interfund transfers is a combination of the monies that go to support school lunch, as well as it's the $2 million that was moved from maintenance district-wide projects to transfer to capital. So that's now placed in our interfund transfers. I think the last time we had the monies there was, I believe, 2017-18 budget. All right, so what I want to open it up after this is that we've, as Bob mentioned, we've done a lot of work on staffing, and we have another meeting with principals on Thursday. If any year, this has been, I think, if more difficult's the right definition of the process this year, trying to look with our principals on enrollment projections, but also trying to gain an understanding of what are they seeing now in this hybrid learning environment, especially at the secondary level, and how many students are participating in the various courses or at the grade levels at the elementary school, and really trying to project forward based on the numbers, but also take into consideration what we've been seeing, the flow of activity and participation at the grade level and in the content areas for this year and moving it forward. So I think probably cabinet, if I'm correct, we were probably together 3 hours this afternoon again. We were together yesterday. We've been meeting on this, even through electronic means. We have tasked our principals. There are some things that they are working on now that we asked for greater clarification and updated enrollments, especially with the high school master schedule. So Rudy's been working on that. So our budget does include, to get to the $98.2 million, primarily due to the enrollment decline and the projections moving forward, 7 net reductions in instructional FTEs. 4 of those FTEs as of present would be accessed, and 3 are due to attrition and not backfilling positions. We have several retirements, and Joe's done a real nice job of just keeping his ear to the ground and working with our unions to see if we're hearing about retirements. So this does include, I think we know, the 3 teachers, and there's a couple potentials right now. And Joe and I have met with our ESO leadership several times to provide appropriate updates as we've moved along with staffing discussions. So I think they get the financial picture. They get there's a declining enrollment. And so far, I would say, Joe, right, I think they've been good partners along. I think they fully get what we're looking at for next year. But I want to be careful. It does help us get to our $98.2 million budget. But the budget was really the tool that drove us to really take a hard look at our staffing in comparison to the needs we need to run our programs. And I know through Brian has given our principals, especially with Rudy, just looking at what electives run from year to year based on enrollment, and really taking a good look with their team on what the expectations are for next year in terms of the academic offerings. But I do want to be clear, and I think it's important that the cabinet, we wanted to make sure that we were clear this evening, because we know how when numbers are presented and the financial landscape is presented and we talk about reductions in staffing, people think that, there's cuts to electives or programs for kids, and that is not the case. These reductions do not cut electives for students. They do not cut courses. If there's a decision not to run an elective, say at the high school level, it'll be because the enrollment projection is under the 15 guideline that we've had. And Brian and Bob will evaluate requests for things like AP courses if they're running a little light as to whether they run or not. So it is not, these cuts are not cutting into programs or electives at this point or activities for students. We're just getting more efficient with the use of our instructional staff and really comparing it. And I'll show on the next couple slides, and I know that you've seen it before. It's really the bubble at the secondary level that we're seeing the enrollment decline over the next couple of years. And then once the elementary gets to the secondary schools, it starts to hit the elementary school a little bit more in the outer years. We also have 2 net reductions in instructional support staff. Karen Tessick and I had the opportunity, we really sat down, as well as also with George, to look at non-instructional instructional support staff. And there is an open position that's under Karen's oversight and area of responsibility that is unfilled. We've made the recommendation to cut that position and reallocate responsibilities amongst other identified clerical staff. As well as I am cutting a clerical staff and they will be reassigned to the SOMS main office clerical support from safety and facilities. That position, I'm recommending that we cut it, and we'll be reallocating clerical responsibilities amongst the operational areas. But because of seniority and bumping rights, even in the civil service tenure, this person does bump out, at least for right now, a newly hired person into a senior clerk typist position for the main office. However, we've had conversations with Dr. Corey as well, and he's taking a hard look at how clerical responsibilities are allocated in the middle school and does see an opportunity to leverage a clerk a little bit more than how they're being utilized currently. So Karen and I will work with Chad in terms of the coverage for the main office and work with the other principals where some of the clerical activities happening. I think Karen, pretty much at the high school and the middle school, with some support to the elementaries, may be necessary. So we'll continue to work with the principals. They are aware of these recommendations at this point. We also have, that does not reflect in these overall 9 reductions in FTEs in our staffing picture for next year. We also, what didn't make it to this budget. George is evaluating the structure of his technology department. I think if anything in a pandemic, when you have new people, you end up with a new lens in which to view your needs. We're not cutting an FTE, but we are making a recommendation currently to not fund that position for next year. And we had a request to add a maintenance mechanic back to our staffing picture. We had eliminated that through some restructuring a few years ago when I first joined the district. I've denied that request for next year. I think there's some work we need to do in the maintenance department to gain some efficiencies and workflow. So it'll give us another year for Jack and I to work with that team. So it's 9 reductions, but it's also in addition to 2 other positions that we're not funding or have not approved to be added to our staffing picture for next year. So it's really a total of 11, if you call it staffing related expenses that we have chosen either to recommend that the positions are eliminated, not filled due to retirement, reallocation of responsibilities, or they were not approved to fund in next year's fiscal budget. And I won't go through this again. It's the same thing. We've stuck to our classroom guidelines for the most part. We always use this as a measurement or a barometer to see how our sections are lining up at the secondary level and also our grade level enrollments with Schaefer and Cottage Lane, as well as our specials. And I know Brian and Karen have had a lot of conversation with principals, especially when it comes to regular and special ed and expectations for enrollment and the utilization of certified staff appropriately. This chart is really probably one of the best charts that I like based on what we get from the demographers report. It shows 5 years of actual enrollment to the left, and it shows projected enrollments for the next 5 years to the right. And you'll notice the red in the bottom. We've encountered some level of declining enrollment over the previous 5 years, most notably coming into the 2021 school year with over 130 student decline in enrollment. And that's why we were able to make some changes to staffing that we did in the 2021 year, as well as additional projected declines over the next 5 years. And then we start to see some growth back at the secondary level. The elementary bubble comes through, and then it really just remains it gets sort of flat, if not a little bit of increase, but relatively flat after the next 5 to 7 years. But we are, as you can see, currently projected to be at about 2,760 students next year, to a low over the next couple years that based on our long-range financial plan at this point to about 2678 in enrollment. And that's just a graphical representation of where we would be over the next 10 plus years based on the demographer's report and taking everything into consideration. So really a high of 2,928 students in the 2019 school year to really a low of the 2,511 students at the culmination of 10 years. And this does not, by the way, include out-of-district placements, which we usually have about 61 out-of-district placement students. Oh, sorry, this is not. So the last slide that I had, I wanted to open it to questions, but before I do, some key milestone dates, as Dan mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, and it's on the last slide. We have tonight, which was part of our budget calendar, was our first budget workshop. We have a regular meeting on April 8th, but that's also slated for another budget update and budget work session with the board. And Dr. Pritchard, correct me if I'm wrong, we had discussed in cabinet today, given that we would like the opportunity to run a more of a detailed discussion regarding actual impacts to staff and who may be impacted and greater detail in terms of definitely our staffing picture on 4-8, the request to possibly close to a board retreat style workshop where we could close and definitely talk about staff. And I think at that point, names of staff would be presented, as well as other considerations that we're continuing to make. And by that time, we'll also next week have more information on the state budget. So 4-8 is a key date. The board right now is scheduled to adopt the budget on April 22nd, which is also an opportunity, is also a workshop, if needed, to go over budget prior to the board adopting the budget. And then we have our budget hearing, I believe it's May 8th, if I'm not wrong. And then the budget vote is May 18th. And that is going to be a live vote, both absentee ballot and in-person voting for May 18th. And Dan and Lonnie, I know I had mentioned this at Audit and Finance, and maybe it's too soon to ask, but rather maybe tonight put it on the radar that after 4-8, just asking the board if they would like to have another budget workshop in between April 8th and April 22nd, or after April 22nd, whatever the board may want to do based on the numbers. As Bob mentioned tonight, our goal was to give the board an overview, more of a high level of where our budget is projected to be and some of the considerations that we've made. But we would like to be able to kind of roll up our sleeves virtually and go a lot deeper in terms of what our staffing, who may be bumped, who may be accessed, what that means, any other considerations that we may need to have more of a retreat style conversation when it comes to the budget. But what I'd like to do is pause there. I'd like to open it up to the cabinet if there was anything else that you want to mention that's pertinent to the discussion. And then of course, I would like to respectfully open it up to board discussion and questions. So with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Dr. Pritchard.
Thanks, Alicia. Before I do that, I'm going to ask you one quick question. So, I think this is a question that the board typically asks as we're preparing to adopt a budget. What is the absolute last day that the board has based on the legal calendar to adopt a budget? Because I think sometimes the board, knowing that, sometimes they like to add an additional workshop, sort of in an attempt to, maybe take another look, or as situation develops, as we know more information, we're able to, give the board a better picture. So can you answer that?
Sure. So I just want to make sure I have the date of the hearing right. We have to have the budget notice out 6 days before the budget hearing. So I believe you're at roughly around May 1st. And then, we need time, obviously, between the adoption of the budget to finalize the spiral bound book and get that into the schools. They have to be present in our school buildings and our public libraries, I believe 14 days before the budget vote. So based on the calendar, we would be looking at, and my apologies, this is very, very slow tonight. I stopped the share.
I'm gonna say this, I'm going to word it in a negative way. What if the board is not ready to adopt the budget on April 22nd? Hopefully they will be.
Yep, so we
What
have,
if they need another day?
oh, absolutely. So we have, the hearing is Thursday, May 8th. If I back that up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I would say that we would start getting worried on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Alicia, I think that's Thursday, May 6th, not 8th.
May 6th. Oh, thank you. Oh, geez. That would help if I was in the right month. Thank you, Christine. Let's see, Thursday, May 6th. I would say that if we would need from April 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, by Monday, March 26th, we would have most of the notice and everything framed out and in holding pattern. But by April 26th, really that budget would need to be adopted in time for us to verify our numbers, make sure the notice and our budget books and everything are in our schools and we're ready for the hearing. So anytime, so we have before that.
And I only suggest that because the board may say, April 22nd, we're not ready to adopt the budget. Let's look at that strictly as a workshop with spreadsheets and Post-it notes and whatever. I mean, the board may not be there, but just, I know some years they are and some years they're not. So in the event that we needed that extra date, if April 22nd, let's say it wasn't adoption night, let's just say it's another night to sit down and roll up our sleeves and do the, sharpen your pencil drill. We could possibly do April 26th to adopt.
Yeah, and then we
And
have,
Alicia,
It'll be okay.
and Alicia, when is the finance council supposed to be reviewing the budget? That also has to go in here because the board
we have,
utilizes that as well.
yeah, we have the April, let's see, where is it?
Keep in mind, if the budget's not sufficiently finished and we go to finance council, that they're going to question what they're actually reviewing as well.
Yeah. So we have, I'm just looking on my calendar, it's mid-April is the finance meeting. April, let's see, where is it? Cabinet Facilities Wellness. I believe it's the week of April 19th. So we would have time, I'm wondering, between the meeting on April 8th, if it would be productive to have a budget workshop the week of the 12th and then bring it to audit and finance, the meeting the week of the 19th. And then we could shift, as Bob mentioned, maybe possibly a special board meeting on April 26th to adopt the budget if needed. But that would give us another workshop. We'd have 2 workshops before the next audit and finance committee and then come back to the board.
So right now you have a meeting on 4/8
Mhm,
and 4/22.
mhm.
And the adoption is tentatively scheduled for 4/22 with the finance committee or finance council meeting the week of 4/19.
Correct. And what I could do, Lonnie, too, is I could even switch it around. There's enough notice. I could see if maybe the audit and finance could meet the week of April 12th and we could do a work session with them and then come back the week of the 19th and use that meeting on the 22nd as a work session with the board.
But to Dan's point, if the budget's not close to being finalized, the finance council is not going to know what they're looking at.
Yeah.
So it's more important that we have 2 board meetings two workshops before Finance Council. And then we could always cancel one of them if we don't need it.
Sure.
But
I would
I'd
agree.
schedule two board workshops,
Okay.
then Finance Council, and then, the adoption on the premise that Finance Council doesn't have any comments. Or if they have comments, we can get the comments prior to the adoption meeting
Okay,
and address their comments prior to the adoption.
okay. So let's see. So we have 4/8. So would Lonnie, just to that point, would we want to move up a workshop for the week of the 12th?
I'm trying to look at the calendar at the same
Yeah.
time. So 4/8. We have this, that's 1 week, and the week of the 12th, right? The week of the 12th right now is I'll say a quote unquote open week, right? We don't have any meetings.
We're supposed to have facilities on April.
We have facilities on the 13th.
Mhm.
All right, so it's probably prudent. It's probably prudent to schedule a meeting for the 15th,
Okay,
right? That we can always cancel.
Yeah.
And then we have to schedule the Finance Council the week of the 19th.
yeah, I'll have to move them. So we would normally do, let's see, a Tuesday night. I could see either the Tuesday or Wednesday. And how is that? Is the 20th or the 21st for Dan, for Lonnie? Are either one of those days a better time?
Both are good for me, but we have to get the council to weigh
Yeah,
in also.
you have to get council, get their input. And we have to get the material to them early.
Yeah.
So that they have time to review it.
Okay, yeah. All right, so I can send an email to Finance Council to poll them for the 20th or the 21st. And then we already have the next board meeting scheduled for April 22nd, which is also the budget. And then I guess the board could decide by that time whether you're ready to adopt or not. And then if we need to schedule a special meeting after the 22nd, we could do that, but we would be looking at that Monday, the 22nd, as really the drop dead date for that, which we would pretty much have everything ready based on the number of meetings we'll have in April. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that should give us enough time.
So we're talking about April 8th, April 15th, and April 22nd for board meetings.
Yep.
Are the other board members available for that? Okay. Mr. Henry, I didn't see your thumb up. Yeah, you're shaking your head. Okay, good. Okay. And then we're talking about 420 or 422 for Finance Council based upon their availability.
Yep. And what I can do, Lonnie, is I'll send out an email in the morning and we can get that scheduled right away, just with spring break coming up and plans. I can get that out first thing in the morning to the council.
All right, and then also if you can find out from the other board members if they're interested in attending the Finance Council to hear, firsthand Finance Council's comments.
Okay.
And then if we're going to do that and we have a quorum, we'll have to advertise that meeting.
Mhm.
Okay, but I would open that meeting up to, the other board members that don't serve as a liaison or on that committee, so that they can hear or they can ask any questions as well.
Right, so everyone's going to be getting an email from me tomorrow morning. And thank you, appreciate the extra time. And if there's considerations, we'll throw it out, whatever the board would like. If the virtual format works for the next couple of meetings, or whether you'd like us to find maybe a large space where we could ensure proper social distancing, if it's better, becomes to meet in person. we could do that. So we can,
What's the current executive order expiration date? Isn't that sometime in April?
April 20th.
is it April 20th?
So that would only support, the last one, the adoption. I mean, I'd throw it out to the other board members, whether they're interested in meeting in a large conference room, or if the weather's nice, we can meet outdoors.
We have plenty of picnic tables.
Sorry to be the skunk at the picnic. The April 15th, I would respectfully ask if you would consider, we do have a facilities meeting on April 13th. Maybe we preempt that. I actually have a conference on April 15th, my annual professional development opportunity, which is the 15th, which is a Thursday. I deliberately, schedule that on a off week from a board meeting. So
How's Wednesday, the 14th, Dr. Pritchard?
well, it's the 14th, 15th, and 16th. I'm afraid. If it's possible, that week of the 12th, those 2 days there. If not, I can, certainly, I can.
All right, so can we do what you're asking? Move the meeting for the 15th to the 13th?
Okay.
If you,
Ms. Coster, can we look at maybe moving the facilities meeting to the Monday, the 12th?
thank you.
Thank you. Yep.
And
absolutely.
you'll get back to Mr. Henry and myself with the other party's availability on the 12th.
Absolutely. Yep. Okay, so I want to make sure I put notes down.
Thank you, folks. Thank you.
Okay, got it. 4/8, 4/13, 4/12, 4/20 or 4/22 for audit invitations to the board. And then we'll see, based on that, whether we have to publicly advertise some of these committee meetings. Okay. All right. So if we want to open it up for discussion, cabinet members, we can see Karen now. Hi, Karen. Brian, Karen, Joe, George, Bob, was there anything you'd like to add first?
I'm happy to see that the increase, and just, the Board of Education does provide us with parameters. And I think tonight would be a good opportunity to hear some of those. But I just want to, from my own perspective, this idea that, not knowing the board as I do, and understanding some of the standing parameters that this board has used in the past. The rate of increase, budget to budget, is, while it's not less than the CPI, it's pretty close. We're talking about a 1.4% increase in spending versus a 1.2% increase in the CPI. So it's relatively aligned with any sort of inflationary measure, particularly in light of the fact that we are looking at a stressful economy that we're hopefully coming out of. So I think in terms of that, and also the tax cap, the levy, that is well under 1%. And while that may create stress for people who are trying to put together a spending plan, I think for those of us who are looking to obviously not increase a tax rate beyond what this economy can bear, I think is also something that I think is palatable. So today, one of the other constraints we talked about were spending and programmatic issues. And we did spend the bulk of the day today considering what our priorities were in terms of where we want to see ourselves coming out of this pandemic. And none of us has a crystal ball. And at times, some of the exchanges become heated amongst us, because we all have a different idea as to what those priorities were. But after, I don't think, Alicia said it was 3 hours. I think it was probably closer to 4. We did reconcile, and I feel like we're closer to having a better understanding of what those priorities might be. But I don't necessarily want to go into great detail tonight because, again, because we want to be delicate, because obviously it could relate to someone's employment. But of those 7 instructional positions, if 4 were related to staff cuts, reduction in staff, those reductions in staff reflect reduction in enrollment, and I think that's reasonable. And the other 3 that we are looking at reducing via attrition, that I think categorically is are efficiencies as they relate to scheduling. And some years it's easier to find those efficiencies than others because of the intricacies associated with scheduling. So we have a lot more work to do on that. Plus, I think in the coming weeks, we're going to see another item that was not mentioned this evening's presentation. There is a bill currently under review at the state legislature as it relates to not a retirement incentive, but for those individuals who are eligible to retire, they may do so without penalty. So, because oftentimes if you retire prior to the age of 62, the way the formula is set up is that you're penalized. And then there's other categories in that where if it's related to a reduction in staff, that you give that person or that individual the opportunity to retire without penalty. So there's some restrictions built in. So it's not exactly an incentive, but it doesn't penalize those folks that might be otherwise not eligible to retire without a penalty. So that's headed our way too, and that may yield additional folks who may want to retire. This may be a good time for folks that may not have otherwise been eligible, who may now retire without penalty. So that's something I think to consider as well. So at that point, I'll leave it. I'll open up the floor to the Board of Ed. Mr. Jacobs, if you want to go ahead and lead that discussion, that'd be great.
All right, so I'll start the discussion and say that with regard to what I heard early on about the workshops, and to your point, Dr. Pritchard, where you spoke about reduction of positions and so forth. I don't want names discussed during the workshop. We can discuss positions, but no different than our regular public meetings. We don't take names. We don't allow public commentary about names, and I think we should respect that formality with regard to the workshop in terms of confidentiality and stuff. And we should focus on positions. And again, from a board perspective, from a fiduciary perspective, we need to focus on the budget and on the money, and not involve personality, or emotions, sway our decisions. So we unfortunately, someone can say I'm cold-hearted, but we need to focus on the dollars and cents, and avoid bringing in persons, people into it, and emotions into it. So I'd just request we refrain from speaking about specific individuals. The other thing I'll throw out is, in terms of the budget to budget, we're talking 1.41%, but in terms of revenue, the tax base, we're talking about 0.1%. And I'm aware how that's calculated and so forth, but in the current environment, that the 0.1% represents roughly $83,000 in our overall budget. And I think that we would stand a much better public relations point of view if we said that we were holding the tax levy at 0 rather than a 0.1% budget. So I throw that out to the other board members for consideration and thought. Is it, any other board members have any questions or comments they want to add to it?
If I can comment to your comment, Lonnie. I hear you. I would say, let's not engineer a budget to solve for 80,000. Let's get to the right budget. And I don't want to just artificially get to a flat budget. Let's get the right budget answer. And if we're that close, we can solve for it. But I wouldn't set that target yet.
I would say we should set that target or better.
I'll hold my answer till I get a chance to ask my questions.
I hear you. Ms. Lee, you raised your hand?
Well, in a similar light, one of the questions I was going to ask is when I looked at slide 5 and I see that the actual versus the adopted versus the actual projected for this year, this calendar school year has a 5.723 million favorability. So based on that, I would, and being a challenging year. So based on that, I would say, did we really sharpen our pencil? If we're trying to get to these budget forecasting as well as projections to, I don't want to minimize favorability, but we have to get to more closely accurate numbers. So if that does end up, Lonnie, that, you know, it's 0%, it's flat, so be it. But that 5.723 million kind of jumps out at me.
So could I ask just a point of clarification? So if we look at that, that's part of our 4% in reserves, and our reserves, you know, at the end of June with that are really funded up to their legal liability. When we look at that, again, the constraints are there this year. There's just not a lot of wiggle room on the revenue stream. But I guess there's also a question for audit and finance. Do I go back and revisit options for our reserve strategy moving forward? Because this year, I agree with you, Christine, there's really no wiggle room in our revenue picture. Before, we always try to maintain an accurate projection for state aid, but we're also continuing with the reserve strategy, maintaining our 4%, being able to fund our reserves. But I guess potentially some questions could come up on a year like this. Do we supplement in any year by using our monies from our reserve to support our budget, or leave it? Okay, I had to ask. I'm looking at Dan, but yeah, I had to ask that question.
Perhaps, Ms. Lee, if I can ask a different question. My question based on a budget presentation is what I take away from tonight is we have a good sense of what our revenue budget will be. And the district has done work to find a way to spend to that revenue number. And you've made accommodations, you've made some staffing decisions. What I would like to see in the next workshop, and I offer it up to the other board members to disagree or agree, is almost a reconciliation to the strategy. Because at the end of the day, we have a strategy, right? Now, granted, you know, COVID put a little bit of a detour here, but the strategy required us to be making investments in key areas to be driving this district's performance to that level of exception that we aspire for. And when I look at a presentation tonight, I can't tell you whether or not I agree with the budget. And should we reduce it by 80 grand or 5.7 million? At the end of the day, what's our long range plan telling us from a strategic perspective? And are we making the investments in those areas that we stand behind? And because we should be making a budget that says we want to invest in X, Y, and Z for focus areas A, B, C, and D. And then, oh, by the way, we can cut something and either it balances. Well, if it doesn't balance, then we can lean in and say, well, what are you going to do to balance the budget? Because we're committed to the strategy and making those investments. And that's what I would like to see. I'd like to see how this brings the strategy back and into a budget that says we are making, you know, the appropriate investments as opposed to just solving for a spending plan. Please don't misunderstand my point. I know a lot of hard work goes into making this balance, and you've already done that. But I can't see how this budget will further our strategy enough or not. It doesn't jump out in the presentation. I'd like to see that. And then with that, part of it would be are we funding the strategy and what are the strategic investments? But then two, going back to Christine's point, is where did all this favorability come from that created the 5.7 million? And contemplate that in the spending proposal, because obviously, right, it wasn't in the revenue side. It was a piece of it, but the majority of that 5.7 came on the expenditure side. So it has nothing to do with reserves. right? It has, clearly expenditures came in favorable, and I would challenge, I'd add on to Christine's challenge. Are we projecting the expenses accurately enough? I'm okay with having contingencies, but that's more than a 5% contingency. And how do we make sure, again, we're funding the strategy, and that's what we should care about, right? Are we proceeding on a strategic plan on course, and are we funding it appropriately by or not? Because then I would also ask you, we're taking out, multiple positions that are definitely student facing or curriculum facing. Should we be, right? If there's going to be another year of 5.7 million worth of favorability in the budget, should we really have made those decisions or not? So again, it all wraps around for me. And again, I don't know how everybody else feels. Bring the strategy element back into this, right? How are we proceeding? How are we now putting dollars and cents against the strategic plan, and can we afford it? That would be my
Points.
5 questions wrapped up into one.
And how does it affect the long range picture?
And absolutely. I mean, maybe off a little bit because of COVID costs and things like that, but at least let's have the conversation that says, we put in the strategic plan a couple of years ago, and we should be investing. We're committed to the strategy, or we should be making continual investments in key areas to drive. And is it funded in this budget or not?
I think when we put together that first draft, what we'll do is like we've done in years past, we'll map expenditures to focus areas, which we've done, and I think we've done the last 2 budgets like that. So I think that's really important. I gotta say that much of the favorability is obviously we try to underspend our budget by a small percentage, but not by 5%. That's largely from our inability to really forecast revenues. And as you all know, you don't know what the revenue is going to be until you actually realize it. You don't realize it until you actually receive it.
But Bob, the revenue is only 1 million of the 5.7 million.
Right.
So we don't have to unpack it right now. I would just say for the next conversation, again, just my recommendation, right?
Yep.
What are the investments we're making that are driving the strategy, and are they enough, right? Going back to what didn't make it into the budget that we want, all that is about, are we funding the strategy?
Yep.
And then when you say, well, wait a minute, now I'm putting too much money into funding strategy, I can't balance the budget. Well, then now explain where the 5.7 came from. And again, right, we'll have some cushion. We don't want to miss the budget, but I would shake out the budget variance that we're experiencing this year to see if that can also help fund inevitably what you're going to come back with when you realize that you need more money for the strategy. My hunch.
And it may be helpful, like we did with kind of audit and finances, or facilities, put a spreadsheet right up on the screen in our next work session in terms of what it looks like an overall strategy and even long range, plugging in the different numbers and seeing the impact. So making it a real work session where we can put that spreadsheet up on the screen. I think we found that very helpful in different forums in the past, but we can do that, and we should know more about the federal dollars. So some of tonight with some of the expenses,
Sure,
may or may not made up, we could speak more in depth about how we're using those federal dollars to continue the investment, as you mentioned, in those investments for our strategic goals too.
and if you answer those questions, then we can better react to the FTE reductions. Right? Again, part of it was attrition, and I got it, but those dollars are coming out of the budget. We're taking instructional dollars out of the budget. Or we're taking, should we be doing it, right, in light of what we're trying to achieve? So you need to answer the bigger picture before you can, before I can respond to whether or not right budgetary decisions.
I have 2 other questions, if I may. One is more specific. In slide 5, when you go through all the numbers, my question is about transportation aid. So does that incorporate now the full funding of the transport? Are we made whole on transportation, and does those line items reflect that?
That transportation aid is still based on the analysis from the first proposal. Part of the governor's budget, there's, as Christine, I think you guys did a lot of work with NISBA and some of the transportation. There is advocacy that part of this budget is going to include monies being made up for expenses incurred during the pandemic, as well as not penalizing us.
Right.
For aid that has not come through yet. So once we get a certainty next week, hopefully with budget, I'll be able to update this in greater detail. I will say that with the transportation, we kept it at the 2021 levels. So we should see some increase with that if they remove the penalties associated with it. So I'll better be able to update that on our next meeting. I'm hoping that what may turn out to be the governor's last term is that he's, again, an on-time budget for April 1st. So we know that, but we are expecting those monies to return to our aid. So that's another, so we're waiting for that. We're waiting to see, there's advocacy for more of the foundation aid and not being supplanted through the federal dollars.
Right.
So next week might be a game changer in terms of what we're looking at in our financial picture. But then it still ties to what Deanne just said in terms of how we're using our resources to fund the strategy. And so this may, even with staffing and everything else, may change the dynamic from where it stands today. So.
And then my second question is about the enrollment. And I know we go to experts and, you know, we pay these consultants and based on a lot of data, but I've also seen in the most recent years, the actual enrollment being higher than the projected, and the influx of, you know, the exodus from people from the city coming into the burbs is increasing. So how close, how confident are we all with that number of the declining enrollment?
So Ms. Lee, I could respond to that. We are seeing an uptick at the elementary level. If you just looked at that number that Alicia had up prior, I think it's at 197 were predicted for this coming September. We're over 200 already. So you are correct that I think because there is an exodus, what we're seeing in my office is a lot of people moving into the area. They're moving here for the schools, which is wonderful. And we are seeing that enrollment tick up a little bit at kindergarten right now.
Yeah, I mean, the houses are flying and there's very low inventory. So I just want to make sure that we just don't get caught. You know, we're projecting all these declines and then all of a sudden all the kids show up, you know, so whatever we can do to find out the most accurate information.
And then one of the materials reports that we'll have sent to the board before the meeting on the 8th, if we finish some of the principals meetings, besides the demographer's report for looking at the section and staffing reports that go to the board when we've had a chance to reconcile our picture, we'll also look at what the actual beds day data was. And then our principals will look at actual enrolled students now and look at how many are moving up to the next grade level. And we'll use those numbers in our section and staffing report to project the number of sections at the elementary level and the number of sections and FTEs at the secondary level. So those reports will be a part of the package coming to the board. We just needed another meeting with the principals. And again, we just with the caveat that staffing, I think, just has to be one of those things that's considered labeled draft for now, probably even through our meeting on the 4/8, just so that we receive your direction as well. After we answer these questions at the next meeting, it could also change our staffing picture, but we want to get those reports to you so that you can see what we're seeing in the initial reconciliation. But we will compare it to actuals. High school is a little difficult right now, I think. And I think Karen and Brian went over this today, was just with the students kind of bouncing kind of back and forth between in-person and hybrid and all of that. And just maybe kids may have changed their schedules from the beginning of the year till now. So the principals are kind of updating the enrollment based on present enrollment in courses so that we can compare. So we're going to do that work with them more on Thursday. So we're hoping to get those reports out to you next week so that you have a week or more just to look at some of the staffing reconciliations that we've done based on our current picture.
And then the last thing I wanted to ask, I thought I heard some comments about 2021, 2022 being back to a normal year. And everything I'm reading and everything I'm hearing in the news, it's not really going to be a normal year. I mean, we may have kids back in the classrooms, but the pandemic is not going away in September. So I just want to make sure that when we looked at the budget and we looked at what our needs were, that we incorporated that. Now, I know of course, we have a strong foundation. We already built a lot of barriers and so forth. But you're still going to need the cleaning supplies. You're still going to need to do everything that you need to do for the students to be in the classroom, but it's not going to be a normal year. So I just want to make sure our budget incorporates that.
I have more of a comment than a question, and it is, hearing the loss of any staff, instructional staff, makes me very uncomfortable, makes me nervous, and I just wanted to thank Dan for articulating that for me, and just sort of that's what I was feeling, but I wasn't sure how to articulate it, and so I fully support all of Dan's comments and just really understanding. And I think the way you said, I wrote it down just so that it was like clear to me. You said investments that are driving the strategy. That makes so much sense to me. So I just look forward to, really working through that.
I stole Dan's line too. I was feverishly writing it down so we could use it.
Dr. Stepanian, one of the questions Dan is also going to ask us at some point, as you may recall, he'll ask, what don't you have in this budget?
Right.
So that's another
Right.
way of looking at it, and that's always the question when we're
Right.
poking at this, because my focus area is to make sure that the budget reflects the will of the board, and so I asked that question. So if you were to ask me that tonight, just quickly, and my answer will always be related to class size, and that's
Right.
and that's just the one we just throw it out there, because class size does matter, and I think to have to be able to do that, obviously it affects staffing and space. So whenever we do cut staff, it has to be surgical, and it can't ever affect kids, and we try our best not to let that happen. But again, your comments are well received, and we'll be prepared to have those conversations when we get into this workshop a little bit further.
I agree with both Dan and Kara, but I have to be honest and say the number that jumped out at me was where the instruction and the employee benefits were over 80% of the total budget. And I don't know if there's like a general percentage or guideline. I guess the two previous budgets that I was involved in, that percentage seemed to be closer to 70%, if I'm not mistaken. So is there a general guideline as to what that percentage should be?
Usually it is right in that range. Most school budgets are anywhere between, I would say, 75 and 85% of your budget on the top end. But we can go back, Tom, we've looked at payroll several times now, outside of the pandemic expenses that we were not incurring this year. But we can certainly break that down further for our next meeting.
And then I know an exercise that we went through maybe 2 budgets ago was how many teachers are underutilized? If they're only teaching at 60% of their capacity, number one, it's an equity issue. If some teachers are maxed out at 100% and other teachers are only teaching at 50%, there's an equity issue there, but it's also potentially we have too many teachers, so that analysis just has to be performed.
And that speaks to our efficiency issue. And again, I think it's a little easier at the elementary level because that's more of a mathematical projection based on, moving students forward. But sort of the conversation we're going to have on Thursday relates to electives, scheduling electives, and trying to predict what students' requests are. And the sort of the demand aspect of this, which really is more of a high school issue. And that's something that the sooner we can predict that, I think the more efficient we can be in our scheduling model. So that's something we definitely worked on today. It does speak to the exercise you've just expressed, Tom. Also, I think we want to discuss sort of the year-to-year percentages as it relates to those year-to-year percentages. I think the budget really, the budget has really reflected, at least salaries. And off the top of my head, I don't have the benefit information. It's a little bit over 70%. I want to say 72, 73%, but we'll prepare that year-to-year projection in terms of what salary and benefits have looked like historically from a percentage, that piece of the pie. And then I think we'll also be able to present to the board the three-part budget, which I think will reflect that as well. So those administrative costs, those categorical expenditures as it relates to that legal requirement, the administrative component, the instructional component, and the capital component. So we'll have that analysis ready for the board's review prior to the April 8th.
I guess one other question or comment or concern is just, we have teachers that aren't in the classroom, the instructional leads or team leads.
Yeah, coaches.
Do we need to review that and just make sure that we have the right number?
Yeah, we were doing that today. That was part of our 4-hour meeting today. So yes, we will. So we have a couple of different scenarios that we're currently considering, and we'll definitely, again, in anticipation of any sort of board discussion at the upcoming workshop, we'll be prepared to have that conversation.
That's it for me.
So I like the seed I planted to get all this conversation going. I think everybody had great comments in terms of what the board's looking for next time around. The only other thing I would like to add is in terms of, what Dan had said about, investments, in accordance with the strategic plan. We also need to look back and see what investments we've made over the past couple of years and see that they are proving prudent in terms of the decisions we made. Because just because we made it last year or the year before, it doesn't necessarily mean we have to stay the course if we think there's a better utilization of that investment. So as much as everybody's saying to look forward, we do need to look back and see where we allocated funds, in the past, and make sure that was a prudent decision, or whether that needs to be revisited as well. Anybody else have any other comments? All right, so here we are at the end of March, right? We have the upcoming spring recess, and then we come back basically into that first week where we're going to have the next board workshop. So when Dr. Pritchard, do you believe the board will start seeing, follow up to these discussions in preparation of, for review prior to April 8th?
So we actually have, I'll answer this question as quickly as I can, and I'll ask Ms. Coster to correct me if I'm wrong, but we have a draft now. So I think it's not a question of when we can get it to you, but it's obviously we want to make sure it's something that reflects something that is thoughtful and deliberate. So
well, but more to the discussion that just took place, right? To drop a budget binder on our doorsteps, right? I mean, you've already distributed a budget binder, right? Yeah. I mean, we have a preliminary budget binder that, I've gone through a little bit, and I would imagine all the other board members have already gone through. But the question is, with regard to the topics that were addressed this evening, how are we going to, what should the board expect in terms of responses to, it's, comments and questions so that it's all not dropped on the board members
Got it.
April 7th or 4 o'clock April 8th. And we're trying to review it as we're trying to, listen and prepare, to the next workshop.
I understand. I think just for the sake of, knowing that we're going to have a break in there, I think we can with, I know we still have we have a budget meetings with a principal on Thursday. We ought to be able to incorporate that into, because we've been thinking this through. We should have a pretty good sketch for you this Friday for this board packet prior to for us going on, going on spring break. So Mrs. Coster and Kevin and I, we'll meet tomorrow. We'll reflect on this, but I don't think it would be unreasonable for us, knowing the work that we've already done, to be able to package that in a way that's useful for the board by the end of the week. I don't think that's overly ambitious. Matter of fact, I think it's just at this point, it's just a matter of packaging some of the information that we already have. So we'll shoot for this Friday to give you those items that we feel will answer this evening's questions. I'm confident that this work I'm confident that the majority of this work has already been done. There's some due outs that we're looking at Thursday. But again, today was, I think, a very productive day, and we ought to be able to put that in a format that the board can use by the end of the week.
I think just as long as we know that it's all work product and everything's a draft until the board adopts the budget, just because we do need the flexibility and fluidity of the numbers. I think Bob's right. When it comes down to the numbers, that work product could come to the board. I can even send out additional stuff next week. I'm just still focusing on beyond the dollars and answering the board's questions, which if we can translate to dollars in terms of our areas and the investments and our goals based on the focus areas that we're doing. The numbers are done, as Bob has said, in terms of the numbers in the budget. But I think also to getting the board that documentation Friday and maybe some stuff over the break. But I think if it's acceptable, what the workshop model could be as part of the discussion is really going in deeper as to what are those investments in the strategy and talking beyond the dollars and cents, but how we arrived at those decisions to recommend certain dollars to be attributable to maybe certain initiatives or certain goals and make that connection. But just listening to the board talk this evening, we've done discussion protocols in prior pre-pandemic workshops where we've really been able to roll up our sleeves and give data and have a conversation and receive direction from the board. So if it's acceptable, we'd mark everything draft, send out section and staffing reports, send out some of the budget materials and connectivity to answer some of the financial questions. But in terms of the workshop on the 8th, modeling that around a dialogue about funding our strategy and investing and what that looks like, and maybe considerations based on past and future, to Dan and Lonnie's points on how we have funded certain investments, what's the return on our investments from prior investments, and what does the future look like? Maybe that could be the central core to the workshop protocol for the 8th. And then we'll get all of the background documentation and work product to you guys on Friday, Mark.
But also
Friday, Lonnie, I'm sorry to cut you off. I will have something that looks like a narrative of what she just described. In addition to, because we've done that, there has to be a narrative that captures, this evening's workshop, and any additional information that will be helpful to guide the upcoming workshops. I'll put that in a plain language document as we've done in the past for the board by Friday.
All right, but also don't forget about Mr. Henry's questions about teacher equity, balanced workload and so forth, and his question about the instructional coaches and so forth. So I mean, there was a lot of comments or questions that were asked tonight, and I question whether you'll be able to fully address it by Friday.
Well, we've already addressed it, so it's just not something that we've actually. I mean, again, I think we just need, we need a day or two to kind of finalize some of our discussions. But I think we're very close. So I don't think we're that far off. You know, to Mr. Henry's, you know, just not to pick on Tom, but, you know, again, that was Brian, myself, you know, obviously Brian and the cabinet, you know, when we have our discussions, you know, we ask questions of ourselves, and then we'll oftentimes caveat that with the reason why I'm asking that is because, you know, the board is going to ask, right? So that's how we often frame those discussions. Instructional coaches, for example, you know, we talk about those FTEs because, you know, the board is going to ask and we need to have an answer. So that's oftentimes guiding our conversations when we meet to discuss budget. So we you know, it's not that we haven't had those discussions. It's not that we haven't contemplated a number of different scenarios. And it is fairly well mapped to our overall strategy. So, you know, I don't think it's overly ambitious to say that we're at a point where we could have the conversation. I just don't know if tonight was necessarily the right time because we do have some additional work to do. But I think by Friday, I think we'll be in a good, we'll have something that I think reflects maybe not a complete picture, but pretty close to it.
Okay. Dr. Lloyd has his hand up.
Well, okay. Hey, Joe, what do you got for us, sir?
Thanks, Mr. Jacobs. Thanks, Dr. Pritchard. You know, I'm just thinking about if we're going to have a workshop on April 8th, I just wanted to be respectful to our board trustees and the cabinet. We were also going to request that the board go into executive session to review 5 tenure candidates. We could always move that back to later April and early May. I just wanted to throw it out there so I wasn't putting too much on our board trustees in April.
I'll discuss that with Dr. Pritchard during agenda setting. Thank you for bringing that to our attention, and we'll look at the overall schedule and see how it best fits. You know, maybe, you know, cut it down to the number of people, you know, in a given session. You know, maybe spread it out over more meetings. But, you know, to your point, I don't want to overlook that important aspect. And it's the same token, I want to make sure we have sufficient time for the budget workshop. So, you know, Dr. Pritchard and I will review it under agenda setting and figure out how to best handle it and make sure that we provide proper allocation for both.
Actually, you know what, Mr. Jacobs, we have agenda setting tomorrow night. So, and Joe, you'll be there. So, you know, let's put that all on the table and sort it out tomorrow night.
What else do we have for this evening? Everybody's good for now? I see head nodding up and down, so we're good. Okay. Dr. Pritchard, anything else?
Well, you know, one final thought. You know, again, I apologize, Mrs. Lee. You know, I do try to field your questions as quickly as I can. If I can, I oftentimes will pitch it to a cabinet member. But certainly, you know, throughout the week, I think that aside from a couple of missed emails, I do try to get everything answered. So if there's anything that's pressing between now and our next meeting, you know, please feel free to make whatever suggestions or comments are necessary. And we also, you know, in terms of the new normal, what's happening in September. As of last Friday, you know, we've been, you know, incorporating some of the new CDC guidance. We've been meeting actively with our teachers associations and parent representatives to formulate. And again, I expressed this in writing last Friday. So you did have some advance warning, but we are moving forward. I think we're in good shape. I think we're, you know, let's say experimenting is maybe the wrong word. But we're hoping that the format, at least, you know, reflects, you know, in terms of bringing students back, maybe a step towards what September could look like. in terms of bringing all students back when the public health data reflects that we're able to do so. So, you know, again, I think that we're not necessarily transitioning now to the end of the year, but we're actually starting the transition to September when we get back from spring break. So we'll have a better understanding of what those needs might be when we do reopen in September. So just so you know, it's a big item. It's a big lift for us in addition to reopening. In addition to crafting a budget, you know, there are some other things happening right now that are significant. You'll be hearing about those, I'm sure, those things as you're in the community, and you'll be getting feedback. And so if you hear anything or people feel just the general vibe or the general perception amongst the community, I have relied upon each of you to provide us with that feedback. And so if you hear of anything or anybody who's not completely happy or not satisfied with, I know you obviously would bring it to my attention, but you know, again, we're doing a lot of this for the first. There's no model for this. This is we're all sort of searching for answers right now in terms of reopening, and you as a board have been tremendously supportive and allowing us to dedicate our effort to these operational issues. But again, if there's something that doesn't feel right or doesn't sit right, please, obviously, you know, forward it to either myself or Mr. Jacobson. Will attend to it immediately, because we're talking about people's safety, health and safety now, and not just physical health and safety, but people's emotional health and safety. So if there's anything that doesn't feel right, obviously, you know, please bring it to my attention so we can make whatever adjustments we need to make.
With the, you know, effort to bring the students back into the classroom, you know, I agree it's prudent to get them back as soon as possible, and I think it's very important to try and get them back before the summer, because, you know, traditionally that first day of school is always stressful at home because the students have had off for the past several weeks for the summer. And, you know, if they don't have any, you know, or limited recollection of what school was like, you know, beforehand, it makes it that much more challenging, you know, come September. I would also imagine that with all the other spring plannings that you and the cabinet are working on, I would imagine you're trying to figure out what graduation will look like this year. Understanding that the dynamics keep changing, and the Rockland County Board of Health and the CDC guidelines are changing, but I would imagine you're starting to think about different scenarios and you know, potential opportunities to hold graduation. And then I also threw out that you know, the potential for, you know, maybe an outdoor spring musical, you know, concert, since we weren't, you know, since we haven't been able to do one indoors and the weather's getting nicer, maybe we can get our music students to, you know, perform outdoors with some social distancing to, you know, again, at least if nothing else, let you know, get our senior parents there to hear their students one more time before, you know, some students, you know, pack away their instruments when they go away to you know, college and you know, further studies. So you know, I would hope you try and pursue something with that, as well as, you know, and I'll say it again, you know, all the other extracurricular activities besides athletics, that we try and get them back, you know, to in-person sessions in some sort of fashion, because, you know, we've got to focus on all the students, you know, the entire student body.
We're gonna continue to push that forward, and we'll have more to share in the days ahead. I'm going to say this: we're following. We are the only district in the county that is following CDC guidance with fidelity, and I say this based on conversations I've had with other superintendents. So we've had this sort of bifurcated model. We have elementary looking at the, you know, this issue of the 3 feet or less than 6 feet with barriers and mitigation strategies, and then the secondary, which obviously figures in the rate of transmission as part of the return strategy. we're the only district in the county that's doing that. And I bring this to your attention because you're in the event that we do get some feedback in anticipation of somebody saying, well, why are we the only district in the county that's not doing it this way? I hope that you'll continue to support us because I think we're doing it the right way. I'm putting that out as a disclaimer, but again, I'm trying to do this in a way that, not knowing, not being a public health official, I'm really doing this not so much from a political standpoint, but from a public, from what I believe to be the science as it has been presented to us by the CDC. And again, I got to say that you've been tremendous. When I hear other superintendents say things like, well, my board voted unanimously to bring everybody back. You haven't done that. You've really left those operational issues to us. So thank you for that. And thank you for your continued confidence and your support. Because I think ultimately it has made a difference for us. I think we're able to make good decisions on behalf of kids that are not necessarily popular, but they are definitely bearing the safety of our staff and our students in mind. And I think certainly the data reflects that. So it's not just me being boastful or me being grandstanding. Again, the metrics, I'm sure back me up on that. So again, thank you for that. And that's all I have, folks. That's a lot. Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Lee.
You have something.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question. Maybe it's targeted to Dr. Tessick. Have we had any concerns, or do we have any concerns to address the anti-Asian hate that's happening in the news? Are any of the students experiencing any concerns? I can only tell you from my experience, it's really tough to go out there now, even to go grocery shopping. So whether it's perceived or whether it's actual, you feel this tension, riding over you. My daughter feels the same way as she walks around. So we do have a good percentage of our students who are of Asian descent. Is this something that we need to address?
So what I can share with you is that our counseling staff is specifically in light of what happened. Any time that there is, in this case, an attack on any specific group, in this case, our Asian community, they immediately react with that by, for lack of a better word, pouring in, which means they literally pour into the classrooms check, whether it's the kids are in or online. We've been using this app called Pear Deck, where we can get a sense of that. Principal Arietta actually did he videotaped a message into all of his classes as well at the high school level regarding the act of violence against the Asian community. And that video was seen by all students during period 3 today. So absolutely, I agree with you, Ms. Lee. It is something that everybody is watching and monitoring, from even the youngest students, because we know that parents can also obviously feel a great deal of stress and anxiety, which can just affect the kid in a different way who may not comprehend what's happening. So the team is on it and paying attention to it. Depending upon the assessment, then yes, then the lessons will occur if necessary, or individual sessions, small group sessions will occur.
So that's the structure for our kids. I've been actually speaking to our staff members who are Asian, just because, and the emphasis of the conversation is on, while you're looking out for them, we got to make sure we're looking out for you. And I guess I'm having those conversations in terms that are based upon the employee, essentially what you've just expressed. Certainly this fear, apprehension. My own family identifies as Asian. And some of the things that they've said have been centered on things like, about the virus, the coronavirus or COVID-19, and people making comments. And my daughter, I don't mean to personalize this, but my daughter saying that she's not comfortable going out for a run anymore at night or during the afternoon. And she's She probably shouldn't anyway, just like, because I'm her overprotective dad. But she says it's different. So that was particularly striking for me. So knowing that maybe sometimes our adults in the district aren't necessarily, they're not, our adult staff who may identify as Asian may not feel like that they're not seen, or they're invisible, or they're not, maybe maybe they feel taken for granted, or maybe they feel overlooked. So starting to address some of those issues, but that's very personal. I think especially for adults who, might otherwise feel like they've been overlooked, or maybe are trying to be overlooked, or maybe not trying to identify in that way, and now all of a sudden they're being forced to. So just to let them know that on their terms, that they know who to reach out to, a supervisor, or a colleague, or somebody who they know that they can turn to, and if they don't have anybody, they always have Joe Lloyd, because he's the staff relations guy. So Joe, I know Joe's been working very actively to address those issues as well, because it's, we don't want to, we know our kids are definitely, we have structures in place for kids, but we also don't want to forget that some of our staff are also identify as Asian. So.
Miss Lee, I just want to share a former student from Tappan Zee High School also reached out to Mr. Arrieta and myself about a week ago, and we're going to schedule a meeting with that particular individual to gain some insights from them as well.
I have a quick question, kind of a follow-up to something Lonnie said earlier. I'm just thinking, for the spring musical, why couldn't we do something along the lines of what we did for graduation last year? Put a stage out on the football field.
So I've been meeting with both principals, as has Alicia. We have been looking at the possibility of renting an outdoor stage, either for both schools or one, and seeing if we could do the middle school play, but there are some logistical issues with that. Alicia, I don't know if you want to chime in, and then there's streaming restrictions, but we would like to see very much an outdoor performance, both at the middle school and the high school. I think it would be awesome.
As Brian mentioned, we've been working with a company, MTI, who does the licensing, to see if we can also stream, given that we know that we're still in a pandemic, and some families, even if it's outside, may not be able to or feel comfortable coming on site. So we just actually had a meeting, I think it was yesterday now, so I'm keeping track of my days, with MTI and the middle school crew. But Brian's right, we're planning for outside. Honestly, we've been planning for all contingencies, inside and outside only, if there's an availability to have some inside, but we'd really like to have the live streaming, but it's difficult to do live streaming outside. So we are working through the details of that right now with Jamie Fodor and Chad Corey. And I know the principals, just from us kind of soliciting and planning for the end of the year events, just as you've mentioned, Tom and Lonnie and everybody, just looking about how we get creative and offer opportunities for students to celebrate end of the year activities. So they're also working on that. So Brian, I think we'll probably have an update from principals. Maybe we can bring it up Thursday and provide an additional update. And Jen Citrullo and the crew, the same crew that helped us with graduation last year with sound and video, BOCES has a contract with them. So we're looking at the opportunity to schedule through BOCES for some of the sound and video, similar to what we did for graduation last year, for graduation and some of the move up ceremonies and performances. So then we'll be able to garner some BOCES aid on the expense associated with using sound and video and that too. So that's been very helpful that Jen Citrullo has been a part of those conversations. So we should have an update shortly.
Just for clarity, I was talking about concert musical, band, orchestra.
It would be for both. We would,
Okay.
if we were able to get an outdoor stage, we would be looking at graduation, concerts, the play potentially.
Okay, all right. I just want to make sure we're all talking about everything. All right, great.
Oh yeah, for sure. Because you want to have parents and an audience be able to come and feel safe, and to be able to do that outside, I think would just be excellent. So we're gonna
And let me add senior awards too. Maybe we can throw that one in there.
And then Karen with her connection with our food truck guys, we thought maybe, boy, even get like a truck with popcorn or snacks or something for concerts outside. Just it'd be kind of neat to have some of that. And Karen could probably hook us up with one of the food truck.
And now we're trying to think of creative ways to celebrate student work. We had even talked about, using the food truck from the Halloween event that we didn't get to have. Those people, of course, are still in. But the idea of having a celebration night, whatever that could look like even if it was smaller groups of musicians throughout the park, and you could walk from zone to zone and let the kids play. And this is something we talked about actually pre-pandemic, about using courtyards in the schools and really showcasing smaller groups of students. But yeah, we're thinking of everything we can. Agreed.
So just FYI, Orangetown does have an outdoor stage that they use at Veterans Field during the summers for their summer concerts. So I don't know.
Who we talked, Mark? What's our contact at our show, Alicia?
Tom, it's funny that you mentioned that. It's Mark Albert. Jen Citrola actually mentioned that today. And that we may want to get a hold of him fairly soon, because I guess they may book, others may book.
I think they have a weekly summer concert series. It's like once a week or once every other week.
Yeah, honestly, our challenge is going to be, getting the stage and getting it, because they're in high demand. I think anything like that. So, however we can get it, if we can get it this week and secure it, if we're going to get one for the middle school and one for the high school, the same one, we're going to use the same one, I think, that we used last year for graduation, right, Alicia?
We've already booked one.
I would say that this is your problem, not the board's problem.
Yeah.
And we want to be fiscally responsible too, since now we're the budget discussion.
The board raised the question. You figure it out.
Thank you.
I don't want to cross my line into operations.
We needed that mental break and to talk about operations and some student events from all the other conversations we've been having lately. So thank you for that brief pause in time to do that.
Good at it, though. For whatever it's worth, you are good at it. So, but I get it. Keep the line drawn clearly. I understand.
Tell us how we're going to celebrate. That's what I want to hear.
That's a deal.
All right.
Compared to last year's graduation, that's for sure.
We did book that.
If you want any particular assistance from any particular board member, reach out to the board member. And again, if you want my personal opinion, you can ask for it. But as far as the board, as a governing body, tell us how we're going to celebrate. Are there any other business for this evening? All right. I wish everybody enjoyable spring break for those who have the break. And for those who have holidays coming up, I will say again, hopefully you'll have an opportunity to enjoy and celebrate the holidays with your family as the pandemic allows you to do. But let's all be safe out there and respectful of each other. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.